It can only get better. 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 Is what I'm hoping. After watching Ruben Amorim's first game for Manchester United, a 1-1 draw away at Ipswich, and were there some signs that there was going to be a change? Yes, there was a decent bit of framework for the new style, and you can see what he's going to try and implement when there's better personnel available, maybe some that are more suited to the system that they'll be playing in, and just a general bit more athleticism. Full credit to Ipswich, though. They matched him up player for player, style for style, and you can see the difference in a sort of back three hybrid system that is still raw, that is still new to a lot of the players, that is still taking some time adapting against a team that are well versed in it, that are really well adapted to it, and that are very comfortable within the system, and just look, very easy with their roles. Just they know what's expected of them in certain positions and in certain areas of the field. And there was something which Ruben Amorim spoke about in his interview with Gary Neville, which is when a ball is with a certain player in a certain position, the other players should know what position to be in. That wasn't on display with Manchester United, but it was fully on display with Ipswich Town. And I guess that's just the difference between a manager who's been here 2 minutes as opposed to a manager that's been here about 2+ years. But we're going to go on to the Manchester United attacking phase first and see how that came on. So the biggest thing that I was interested in coming into this game was this centre midfield position, this pivot position in United's build-up. I spoke about it in my preview of Amorim at United about how whether it was going to be a De Ligt moving into the central areas to then play it to the more technical player, or that player in the centre area of the pitch was going to be the more technical player. And it remains to be seen if it's going to be De Ligt full time. Maybe because of the players available, he was the one seen as the player to use with his back to goal, his back to play, to receive it from Onana. But he was never really comfortable enough taking it on the half turn. Obviously, Ipswich pressed well, they pressed high. Casemiro isn't skilled on the half turn either. He's never been that sole pivot in a midfield build-up phase. He had Modric and Kroos for that. So United couldn't really get going in that midfield area. They were quite central, they were quite bunched up. It made it easier for Ipswich to press. Cajuste, is that how you say it? Not entirely sure. Who I thought had a fantastic game. Pressed onto Casemiro really high. The lap would go from De Ligt, Hutchinson onto Evans and Smodics into Mazraoui, and they'd really suffocate them in. Now, where they had Onana, which was a get-out-of-jail-free card, that they could use to him, where he could, try and chip it into the fullback areas, maybe go into one of the tens if, let's say, Casemiro or De Ligt pulled in centrally, then Bruno or Eriksen could come in a little bit wider to receive it in these areas. Burgess would follow in Bruno Fernandes. Morsey would be more concerned with Eriksen, but those were on. It was all dependent on De Ligt and Casemiro's positioning when receiving the ball. Wes Burns and Leif Davis would push onto the wing-backs for Manchester United, but Onana ended up with the ball a lot more than he maybe should have, and maybe Amorim would have liked to have seen him have, but that is just, again, case with certain players in certain positions not being technically good enough. I was actually a little bit surprised we didn't see Eriksen maybe a bit deeper and having Casemiro pushed on, as we saw with Madrid all those years. Eriksen was pushed higher up. He would sort of come in and make it a little bit more of a three so that he could find those angles around and test Morsey to see how much he really wanted to come into this area with him. But it was a struggle, but I also feel like a part of the beauty of the Amorim system is, as much as he has an idea that he can play short and build up short and use the technical quality of his team, it can also be used as a bit of a decoy, as we saw for the goal within 80 seconds. The ball goes out to Mazraoui. Diallo shows for it short here with Davis. Burgess comes on to Bruno Fernandes, who's coming short, and they play a little 1-2. All of a sudden, Diallo's got all the space in the world to run into. They just sucker him into pressing high so they can then exploit the space in behind, which is absolutely, I believe, why Amad Diallo found himself in the wing-back position. He has great breakaway pace from deep and could use that to really find that space in behind Ipswich. And Ipswich were using the wide centre-backs to press. Burgess on Bruno Fernandes, who would come in a little bit deeper like Eriksen to get more involved in the build-up play in this right half space. Garnacho was a little bit higher with Rashford, so Tuanzebe wouldn't be forced into coming to an area he wasn't comfortable with, but Garnacho would drop in a little bit to maybe just sucker him in to allow him to press onto him. One of the criticisms I've heard from people is that Amad played on the right and Diallo on the left. The reason I think that is because what I've just demonstrated with Diallo and Bruno Fernandes on that right-hand side, you had Bruno, the technical player, to use his passing to find Diallo in behind. On the other side, you had Garnacho, who's going to be more likely to run in behind than Diallo, who is okay coming short, he's okay coming central, he's okay getting on the ball in these deeper areas, and he could find those passes in behind into Garnacho to run off of Tuanzebe who did defend him well, Xavi, to be fair, but with Garnacho's pace, he always had good openings and always managed to get free in certain areas. So I think that was the intention. We did see one really good reverse pass from Dalot in the first half to find him. But in just general build-up phases, United weren't doing great in these deeper areas with that side of Dalot, Evans and De Ligt as well. They couldn't penetrate that centre area. They couldn't resist the press well enough. Ipswich pressed fantastically, as I say, jumping onto Onana when need be, and the wide centre-backs doing the jobs that they needed to do. And it was just a really well-rounded display from Ipswich. And United's quality didn't get better as it got up the field either, unless it was with the direct option, unless you were finding Rashford and Garnacho in behind or Diallo coming from deep. It wasn't amazing. And this is the real issue with playing Rashford as a centre forward in this type of system is you're not always going to get it in long. You're not always going to get it in and behind. So your striker needs to offer another option, as Gyökeres did for Sporting Lisbon. And there were times where the short option was on for Rashford to come short, hold the ball up and play it on. I know it's not his specialty. I know he's never going to be a back-to-goal striker. But the lack of effort to really just get on the ball and try and hold it up was really poor. Really, really poor. And any time a ball went long to him or a pass was fed into him in these areas, he lost it or misplaced a pass or he just took the short, easy option, and United were then forced back by Ipswich's press. So it was a really poor showing from Marcus Rashford. He couldn't get up the field quick enough. The slight few openings with Bruno Fernandes coming deep and he could get in short, him and Garnacho trying to attack this left-hand side with Xavi, especially if Garnacho did decide to drag in Xavi short. That made room for Rashford to run into, but again, just nowhere near good enough. Just nowhere near good enough, and it's a bit of a similar story from Rashford at the minute. Take out the first 80 seconds, not good enough. But what happened when United forced Ipswich back? How did it look? Typical 3 sort of box 4 with Garnacho and Bruno in the wide 10 positions, Rashford up top, and Dalot and Diallo in these areas. And again, because of the system, Ipswich went fairly man-to-man. And as the game wore on, they were sat a little bit deeper. They weren't as engaging on the centre-backs as they would have been earlier in the game. And there was a point that Football Made Simple made in his video, which was that Mazraoui and Evans were stuck pretty close to De Ligt. They weren't spreading and maybe coming outside of the shape to receive the ball and to help overload the wide areas. And I thought that was an interesting point, and I completely agree with him. I just think it's such a risk to have these guys spread wide, and then you leave not only De Ligt isolated, but with the pace and the spring of Delap and the running power as well of Delap and Smodics as well, and Wes Burns and Davis getting forward, you couldn't leave these areas exposed to then watch Evans and even Mazraoui get back in. They were never going to catch up. De Ligt you couldn't isolate. Evans and Mazraoui you couldn't leave with that much space to cover. So I just think having the 3 as they were maybe limited the quality from an attacking perspective, but it left their rest defence a lot stronger. I can completely understand why Amorim does it. Once he's got his desired personnel available, will he still stick to it? I guess that is the thing that we'll see in the upcoming games. But he couldn't leave them that exposed in these areas. And Ipswich did a really good job of blocking off the centre of the pitch. Bruno Fernandes and Garnacho, I don't think, did an amazing job of showing for it around these areas either. Garnacho was never going to look for it in a left-back position, so sometimes Dalot would come in a little bit short to receive the ball. You'd also get Diallo doing it. And as a result, the attacks broke down in these areas. When they had Ipswich pinned back the odd time, they didn't really create anything, and it was fairly comfortable for Ipswich. And Ipswich had the good enough balance that Cajuste and Morsey could press on to Ericsson and Casemiro if Smodics, Delap and Hutchison went to press. Wes Burns did a fantastic job of being like a sort of hybrid right wing and right wing backs player. So he was looking after Dalot. But also Cajuste and Morsey did a really good job of staying in tandem with not just Casemiro and Ericsson, but also within line of Garnacho and Fernandes in tandem with Xavi and Burgess, who could engage with them when needed, but also manage the space in between the central centre-back O'Shea and Davis and Burns on the other side. So it was really well managed. And again, it just shows the familiarity that these players have with the system that United players just do not have because they haven't played in it long enough. But full credit to Ipswich, they defended well, they pressed high and they defended deep in their blocks when needed, and they left Muric with very little to do, which is a good thing because if he's left with something to do, he usually fails at it. So when Ipswich would build up, initially it would be in this sort of 2-4, one-sided 4, as Davis would take up the position of an orthodox left-back, but would slowly move forward as the play progressed. Burgess and O'Shea as the centre-backs, Twanzebe sort of right centre-back, right-back position, Morsey and Cajuste as the two deeper players, Hutchison and Smodics in the wide areas, and Burns would slowly move up into a right-wing position, again his hybrid role he did fantastically at, and United were kept with the back five, with Rashford, Fernandes and Garnacho as the front three ready to press. The only problem was they didn't press well enough at all. And it didn't help that they were outnumbered initially in the 3v4. You'd get Casemiro and Eriksen pushing back, with Morsey coming a lot deeper. So it turned into a bit of a 3-1 at points as Davis would go forward, which gave more invitation to maybe Bruno to come round to Burgess, Rashford to move on to O'Shea. But their press was really poor. So Ipswich's back 3, 4, 5, whatever it ended up being, could get on the ball without any real pressure and could fire the ball into these areas and could get it further up the pitch. Also, Cajuste would come out into more of a left-back position as Leif Davis pulled up the pitch, so it turned into a bit of a 2-3, which would cause Casemiro to sort of leave the marker a little bit to stay a little bit deeper, with then Bruno Fernandes staying a little bit deeper, trying to block the passing lane. The press wasn't good enough, and so they could play out time and time again. And it was very easy for him to drop off as well, Eriksen and Casemiro, into these areas, which maybe allowed Morsey a little too much time to get on the ball. He was left isolated quite a lot by United, and he could get on the ball, turn, play, and progress it up the field. You know, when he was pressed, it would be Eriksen coming up, who just isn't a pressing engine at all, and he just couldn't get close enough to him, really. His starting positions are always good. It's just he's physically unable to enact the role that he's been given. But the danger for Ipswich came in these areas, in Smodics and Hutchison, more Hutchison than Smodics. And because Smodics would stay a little bit closer to the left, stay a little bit closer to the defensive line, so it was easier for Mazraoui to press onto him in these areas. But Hutchison coming into these areas here where he found time to get the ball as Eriksen was coming in a lot more centrally, almost behind Rashford to press. This meant that this pass could get fired into Hutchison time and time again. Evans' role was to come out and engage in these areas. And look, I love Johnny Evans, loved by United fans, and he's been one of our best centre-backs since rejoining the club at 48,000 years old. But he would not want to keep repeating this role over the course of a season. Not on Amorim. I can understand why he's trying to play that role, and he didn't have very much else available to him, but Evans couldn't get touch tight to him at all. Hutchison got on the ball and was able to find space around Evans where he could quickly move past and create from there. The issue, I thought, that caused United after this the most amount of problems, and I'm going to slate one player that gets defended a lot by United fans, and I'm going to cut a little bit of slack to someone who does get criticised a lot by United fans, especially recently. I feel that Dalot got sold an absolute stinker with this, because Hutchison would get on the ball here, turn around Evans, who couldn't get near him quick enough. De Ligt wouldn't come across, the defence wouldn't shift across to then, protect that side of the field where the play was progressing. That would obviously mean leaving Leif Davis free on the far side, but that wasn't going to be the threat at all. And if the ball does go over to him, you should be good enough as a defender to read that switch, to allow Casemiro to get back, to allow Christian Eriksen to get back, which admittedly is asking a lot of them at this point. But they didn't. De Ligt stayed as a central centre-back, Mazraoui was the right centre-back, and Diallo was the right wing-back. And it left Dalot in horrid amounts of space to deal with on that left-hand side. So the moment that Hutchison turned and he could play the ball forward, Wes Burns had so much time and space to receive it in these areas. And he got a good amount of crosses away from these areas to be able to put into the box that almost resulted in goals. Andre Onana pulled off a few fantastic saves. And Dalot just couldn't get close to him because he was having to manage so much space in between himself and De Ligt. And De Ligt gets a bit of cushion from United fans. I don't see it personally. I think his mobility is poor. I think his positional sense is poor. I think he's okay technically, but nothing to cover up defensive frailties with, in terms of, he's good enough technically, so you deal with what he can't do defensively. He's a great aerial threat and he heads everything away, but it's just not what everyone's been slating Maguire for the last 5 years. I'm not saying he's as on the level as Maguire. I'd say he's still better than Maguire, but he's not this game-changing centre-back, and he's not this player that everyone seems to think he is. I think he's so overhyped, so overrated, and I think he's got so many flaws to his game. And so many times this space was just neglected by him. So as a result, Ipswich could get through in behind the line. There is a serious mobility issue as well. So with Evans getting caught out in here, having to then come back. Also, the thing that Ipswich have that we didn't, and by we I mean United, I'm a United fan in case you couldn't work that out, is if they couldn't build up short and they couldn't maybe find a player in behind, they had Liam Delap that they could hit from deep, who could hold the ball up, who could win his aerial duels, who competed more than well with the lit and won. I would say it felt like he won a lot of his battles against him. Also receiving it deep to then sucker the lit in, who he could spin and turn far too easily to create and play it out wide. And he got around them that well. And it's all well and good building up from the back, but you have to have the option to go long. You have to have the option to have it get up the field and make it stick, which ideally I think United would want from Højlund, but we're not seeing it as much yet. And Delap had that. I thought he had a fantastic game in that area and just getting Ipswich up the pitch when the short option wasn't on him. Maybe Omari Hutchinson was tracked a little bit better by Ericsson and Casemiro. Again, similar sort of shape from Ipswich in these main attacking phases. It would be with Cajuste in a sort of weird left-back position, Tuanzebe in a sort of deeper right-back position, and Rashford, Garnacho and Bruno couldn't get anywhere close to that back three. They were very reserved, pressing poorly, and just, as I say, didn't get near. And Morty was able to get on the ball in these areas and get time and space to play his passes. Ericsson and Casemiro were caught in between, staying deep on Smodics and Hutchinson and coming up close to try and press. And they got sort of caught in between 3 and 4, and they don't have the mobility to quickly move between markers. Again, Hutchinson coming in a little bit deeper to offer that option to be able to play round into these areas, sucking Evans into these areas. And it was quick little interchanges of play, getting the ball wide and playing inside that really disrupted that back five for United and hurt the mobility that they do not have in those defensive areas. And the lack of midfield protection and the lack of midfield mobility just really hurt them. And to be fair, got a bit better when Ugarte and Shaw came on in the left centre-back and centre-mid role against Casemiro. You know, there was a lot more mobility. I felt like Ugarte was snapping into challenges a lot more, where Casemiro wasn't getting near to whenever the ball came to a Smodics, he could quickly move off of Casemiro. I also feel like there were points where Casemiro was given the task of dropping into the defensive line if Evans or if Mazraoui came out to press, and he could fill that gap to just plug a hole. And again, that's maybe a familiarity thing that they don't have that sense of connection with each other yet. But you know, it just felt like players not getting close to players, and then taking easy options to fill spaces without getting close to Ipswich's players. But as a result, it just allowed Ipswich to play in the midfield more. Morsi got the time and space to dictate play, and he was excellent all throughout. I thought Cajuste into this position as well could move forward and help overload that forward line by making it sort of a 3-1-6. Just a bit of a mess from United, and as a result, they conceded 2 good chances from crosses that, if it wasn't for Onana, would have resulted in United losing and Amorim losing in his first game. So, you know, Amorim will have learnt a lot from this. Hopefully the United players will have learnt a lot from this, and hopefully improvements happen when players are coming back into the fold, coming back to fitness, as we saw with Shaw and Ugarte. You know, it wasn't going to be fixed overnight, was it? Rome wasn't going to be built in a day, and we weren't going to go from how bad it was under Ten Hag to seeing this new lease of life, even with the new manager bounce. It's going to be a work in progress. More time on the training pitch is going to be necessary, and stop sticking him in those press conferences. He doesn't like it. He's a shy lad, bless his heart. Younger kids, they just don't know how to communicate with that technology, do they? But anyway, like the video if you like it, dislike it if you disliked it, comment down below and tell me why either way, and I'll see you next time. Subscribe if you want to see more. As always, I missed that bit out. Screwed up my own outro. In a bit, lads.